It started innocently enough, or at least I thought it did. A bored evening, a laptop, and an unchecked curiosity about the forbidden corners of the internet. People always joke about the dark web, making it seem like a mix of urban legend and cyber mystery. I'd heard about it, sure, but I'd never dared venture there. Not until that night. I'd been listening to podcasts about creepy experiences people supposedly had on the dark web. Stories of hitmen, black markets, and unsettling videos. The idea thrilled me, so armed with nothing but a VPN and an outdated Tor browser, I decided to see if those tales held any weight. I thought I was prepared. I was wrong. It took a while to figure things out, clicking through forums, deciphering bizarre links, and stumbling across meaningless junk. Most of it was just mundane black market nonsense. Guns, fake passports, drugs. I almost gave up. But then one link caught my eye. It was listed simply as The Watchers. The description was cryptic. Do you want to see what they see? Enter at your own risk. Against all common sense, I clicked. The page loaded slowly, almost as if it were considering whether to let me in. When it finally appeared, it was stark. A black screen with a red countdown timer in the center. The timer was set to 10 minutes. Beneath it, a message read, "Prepare to watch. Do not look away." I should have stopped there. I should have slammed my laptop shut and gone to bed. But my curiosity, it felt like an invisible hand pulling me forward. I waited, my heart pounding as the timer ticked down. At exactly 0, the screen went black, then flickered, and a video feed appeared. It was someone's living room. Dimly lit, unremarkable. A couch, a coffee table, a flickering TV in the background. I stared at the screen, confused. Was this just some hacked security camera feed? Then I saw her. A woman entered the frame, holding a mug. She looked normal, mid-30s, wearing pajamas, her hair tied back, but something about her movements was off. Jerky, like a puppet. She sat on the couch and stared directly at the camera. No expression, just staring. I shifted in my seat, suddenly uneasy. The woman didn't move. She didn't blink, just sat there, watching me through the screen. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe this was a pre-recorded video, some kind of elaborate prank, but then she spoke. "Don't look away," she said. Her voice was hollow, distant. It felt like she was in the room with me. My stomach dropped. I hadn't clicked on any audio controls. How could she know I was watching? My mouse hovered over the browser's X, but before I could close it, the screen flickered again. Now the feed was in my bedroom. I froze. There on my screen was my own room, the same bedspread, the same posters, my own desk and chair. But the camera wasn't where my laptop's webcam was positioned. It was from a corner of the ceiling, somewhere I couldn't see. I spun around, searching for a camera, but there was nothing there. "Don't look away," the woman's voice repeated, now echoing through my speakers. The camera angle shifted, panning slowly across my room. My breath caught as I saw myself, sitting at the desk, staring at the screen. My hands shook. This wasn't possible. A knock sounded at my door. I yelped, nearly falling out of my chair. The knock was soft, deliberate, but I was alone in the house. No one else was supposed to be here. The screen now showed only static, but the woman's voice whispered again, more urgent, "Don't look away." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. The knock came again, louder this time, and then the door opened. What stepped into the room wasn't human. It looked like a person at first glance, same general shape, but its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally, its skin pale and slick like wet paper. Its face was smooth, featureless, save for 2 deep black holes where its eyes should have been. It didn't walk. It glided, its movements eerily silent. I turned back to the screen, desperate for some clue, some way out, but the feed was still static. The woman's voice returned, louder now, almost screaming, "Don't look away." The thing was inches from me. Its hollow eyes bore into mine. I could feel its breath, if you could call it that, cold and damp against my skin. My body screamed at me to move, to do anything. But I was paralyzed, trapped in my chair. And then it smiled. Not with its face. It didn't have a mouth. But I felt it. A sensation, like something was splitting open inside my mind, crawling through my thoughts. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. When I woke up, I was lying on my living room floor. My laptop was gone, and my phone too. At first, I thought it was a nightmare, a vivid, horrifying hallucination. But then I saw the marks. Scratches, deep and jagged, covered the walls of my bedroom. Symbols I didn't recognize, scrawled in what looked like ash. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong, like the person staring back at me wasn't quite me. And the worst part, sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear her voice. Faint, like a distant echo. Don't look away. I've tried to move on, to pretend it never happened, but I can't escape it. My dreams are plagued with glimpses of that thing, its hollow eyes and two long limbs. Sometimes I wake up to find new scratches on the walls, new symbols etched into the plaster. I don't go near the dark web anymore. Hell, I barely use the internet at all. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter. Whatever I saw that night, whatever saw me, it's not bound by a website. It's here, always watching, always waiting, and I'm terrified that one day I'll slip up. I'll look away.
Story number 2.
It all began with a message. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling aimlessly through forums late at night. My roommate was out of town, and the silence of the apartment was comforting in a strange way. That's when a notification popped up on my screen. It was from an anonymous user on a thread I didn't even remember visiting. Are you sure you want to see? It was weird, but not alarming. I assumed it was spam and ignored it. Seconds later, another message appeared. This isn't a game. You're being invited. Reply if you're ready. Curiosity flared up. I typed back a quick, sarcastic response. Ready for what? A link appeared in the chat. No explanation, just a link. My stomach churned a little. I'd heard the stories about the dark web and the strange, horrifying corners of the internet, but this wasn't my first time exploring shady forums. I'd stumbled into weird spaces before, and they were mostly harmless. With a nervous laugh, I clicked the link. The page that loaded was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Black background, blood-red text scrolling across the screen, words I couldn't understand, symbols that made my skin crawl just looking at them. At the bottom, a single phrase blinked in bold, "Welcome to the masquerade." A box appeared, asking for my webcam to be activated. My instincts screamed no, but something, a mix of boredom and recklessness, pushed me forward. I clicked allow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a video feed flickered to life. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but as I leaned closer, I realized the person on the screen wasn't me. It was someone else, sitting in a room that looked identical to mine. The same desk, the same chair, even the same coffee cup I'd left by my laptop. I leaned in, squinting, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when the person on the screen smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, too wide, stretching across their face like their skin was tearing. And their eyes, they weren't normal. Black, hollow pits stared back at me, unblinking. Then they spoke. "Welcome, participant." I froze. Their voice, it wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty. But when I turned back to the screen, the figure was gone. In their place was a message, "Round 1 begins now." Before I could process what was happening, my phone buzzed on the desk. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Check your front door." I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to shut the laptop, turn off the lights, and pretend none of this was happening. But curiosity, and something deeper, more primal, compelled me forward. I crept to the door, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. When I pulled it open, I found a small box sitting on the floor. It was plain, unmarked, and eerily light. Bringing it inside, I placed it on the kitchen counter and hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single object, a black mask, smooth and featureless, with 2 eye holes that seemed too big. Attached to it was a note. "Wear it. The game begins at midnight." I didn't know what to do. My rational mind told me to throw the mask away, to call the police, to run. But something about the note, the entire situation, made me feel like none of those options would work, like I was already too deep. When midnight came, I did as the note instructed. I put the mask on. The moment I did, my vision blurred. It wasn't darkness, it was something else, like static mixed with shadows. Then shapes began to emerge. I wasn't in my apartment anymore, I was standing in a dimly lit room. Concrete walls, no windows, a single door in front of me. In the corner, a man sat slumped against the wall. He was wearing a mask just like mine, except his was cracked and his hands were trembling. "You're new," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice echoing unnaturally. "They call it the masquerade," he said. "But it's not a game. It's a hunt." Before I could ask more, a sound filled the room. A low, guttural growl that made my stomach churn. The man's head snapped toward the door, panic flooding his voice. "They're coming. You have to run. Don't let them see you without the mask." The door burst open. I didn't stay to see what was on the other side. I ran. The halls were a maze, twisting and turning in impossible ways. The walls seemed to pulse like they were alive, and every corner I turned, I could hear the growls getting closer. At one point, I stumbled into a room full of mirrors. The reflections didn't match my movements. They stood still, staring at me through the glass, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. "Keep running," they whispered in unison. I don't know how long I was there. Time didn't feel real anymore. All I knew was fear. Raw, unrelenting fear. Eventually, I found myself back in my apartment. I ripped the mask off and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The laptop was still on, the words, "Round 1 complete," flashing on the screen. That was weeks ago. I haven't told anyone what happened. The mask is still in my closet, though I've tried to get rid of it. Every time I throw it away, it reappears the next morning. And last night, I got another text. "Round 2 begins soon. I don't think I'll survive the next round."
Story number 3.
It was a Saturday night and I was feeling restless. My friends had canceled plans, so I decided to stay home and mess around online. I'm not proud of it, but I've always been drawn to the strange and taboo corners of the internet. That's how I found Project Enoch. I'd been on an obscure forum when someone posted about it. The thread was vague but intriguing. "Have you heard of Project Enoch? It's not for the faint of heart. They say it connects you to something otherworldly. If you're brave enough, message me for the link." I should have ignored it, but I didn't. I messaged the user, and within minutes they replied with a single word, "Enter." Attached was a link. It led to a blank page with a single text box. "Input your email to proceed." I hesitated. I knew better than to give out personal information online, especially on sites like this. But curiosity burned inside me, and before I could stop myself, I typed in a disposable email I used for junk accounts. The screen went black for a moment, then a new message appeared. "Your initiation begins now." Moments later, an email popped into my inbox. The subject line read, "Welcome, Seeker." Inside was a set of coordinates and a note. "Come alone. Midnight." My heart raced. Coordinates? Was this some kind of prank? Part of me wanted to delete the email and forget the whole thing. But another part, the reckless, thrill-seeking part, wanted to know what would happen if I followed through. The coordinates weren't far, just outside of town in a wooded area near an old quarry. By 11:45 p.m., I was in my car, driving under a moonless sky. I told myself it was just a stupid adventure, something to laugh about later. When I arrived, the place was eerily quiet. No cars, no signs of life, just darkness and the faint sound of crickets. I parked and stepped out, clutching the flashlight I'd brought with me. I followed the coordinates deeper into the woods, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet, the only sound. After what felt like an eternity, I came upon a clearing. At the center was a circle of people, all wearing identical masks, featureless, pale, and expressionless. They stood silently, their heads bowed. I froze. This was insane. I should have turned around and run, but before I could, one of them lifted their head and spoke. "Welcome, Seeker, you're just in time." The voice was distorted, metallic, like it was coming through a broken speaker. The other stepped aside, revealing a small wooden box placed on the ground. "You've come to bear witness," the figure continued. "Open the box and fulfill your role." My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs carried me forward. The air felt heavy, almost electric. I knelt by the box, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. Inside was a photograph. It was me, taken that very night as I left my car. My breath hitched. There was no way they could have taken this picture. No one had been around. What is this?" I stammered. No one answered. The masked figures stared, unblinking, as the one who'd spoken gestured for me to stand. "Your journey begins now," they said. "You are marked." Before I could ask what that meant, the flashlight flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness. Panic set in as I stumbled backward, trying to find my way out of the clearing. But the woods didn't feel the same anymore. The trees seemed closer, their branches clawing at me as I ran. The ground was soft, almost sticky, and the air smelled like decay. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from somewhere behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my ears. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't find my way back to the car. The woods felt endless, like they were shifting around me. The growling grew louder, closer. I tripped and fell, landing hard on my side. Pain shot through my leg, but I scrambled to my feet, desperate to keep moving. That's when I saw it. A pair of glowing red eyes, staring at me from the darkness. The creature stepped forward and my blood turned to ice. It was massive, hunched over, with limbs too long and a face that wasn't quite human. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It lunged. I screamed and bolted, pushing myself harder than I thought possible. I didn't stop running until I saw the faint outline of my car through the trees. I dove inside, slammed the door, and hit the locks. The thing didn't follow, but I could feel its presence, watching me as I peeled out of there. When I got home, I deleted the email and threw my laptop in the closet. I told myself it was over, that I was safe. But the next morning, I found the photograph on my doorstep. Since then, strange things have been happening. Shadows move in ways they shouldn't. My reflection lingers just a second too long in the mirror. And at night, I hear that growl outside my window. I don't know what I've gotten myself into, but I have a feeling it's not over. Not by a long shot.
Story number 4.
It was 2 weeks ago when the email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "Congratulations, you've been selected for our beta program." I didn't remember signing up for anything, but the sender's address was familiar. It was from a company called Neuron View, a tech startup I'd at about months earlier. They were working on cutting-edge virtual reality systems, claiming their technology could simulate dreams in real time. It sounded far-fetched, but I was a sucker for new tech. The email offered me a chance to try their beta device for free. All I had to do was fill out a quick survey and agree to some terms and some conditions. The idea of being part of something groundbreaking was too tempting to pass up, so I clicked the link and signed up. The package arrived 3 days later, and inside was a sleek, black headset with no visible brand markings. It came with a single sheet of instructions. 1. Wear the headset before sleeping. 2. Set your intention using the accompanying app. 3. Experience your custom dream. It sounded simple enough. That night, I decided to try it out. The app was minimalistic, offering a series of prompts. I selected exploration and typed in a peaceful forest as my dream setting. The app buzzed as it synced with the headset, and I climbed into bed, excited to see if it actually worked. The moment I put the headset on, I felt a faint vibration. A soft hum filled my ears, soothing and rhythmic, and within minutes, I drifted off. The dream started just as I'd hoped. I was in a lush forest, sunlight streaming through the canopy, birds chirping in the distance. It felt real, more vivid than any dream I'd ever had. The smell of pine, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet, the cool breeze against my skin. It was perfect. But then something changed. The sunlight dimmed and the forest grew quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavier, colder. I turned around and saw nothing. The trees behind me were gone, replaced by an endless void. A voice, faint but clear, echoed in my mind, "You're not supposed to be here." My heart raced. I tried to wake up to pull myself out of the dream, but I couldn't. My body felt frozen, like I was trapped inside the headset. The forest shifted again. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches curling like claws. Shadows moved among them, darting just out of sight. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs stretched and angular. Its face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin. It tilted its head as if studying me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I ran. No matter how fast I moved, the figure was always just behind me, gliding effortlessly through the twisted forest. Its presence pressed against my mind, filling it with whispers, words I couldn't understand but somehow knew were meant for me. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell. I woke up gasping for air, ripping the headset off my face. My heart pounded as I looked around my room, reassuring myself it was just a dream. But when I glanced at the headset, I noticed something strange. The device had changed. The smooth black surface was now marred with tiny scratches, almost like symbols etched into it. I told myself it was a coincidence, that maybe I hadn't noticed the markings before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of the dream. The next night, I tried the headset again. I told myself it was just a beta program and glitches were to be expected. This time, I selected Adventure and chose a tropical island as my setting. At first, it worked as intended. The dream was stunning, crystal clear water, golden sands, a warm breeze, but within minutes, the familiar dread crept in. The ocean turned black, the sky clouded over, and the island began to crumble beneath my feet. And then the figure was there again, standing at the edge of the water, its blank face staring at me. "You can't escape," it whispered. I tore the headset off, my hands trembling. That's when I noticed the scratches on the device had grown deeper, more intricate. They looked like runes, almost alive, shifting subtly when I stared at them. I emailed NeuronView, demanding answers. Hours later, I got a reply. "Thank you for your feedback. Please discontinue use of the device immediately. Someone will contact you to retrieve it." That was it. No apology, no explanation. I packed the headset away, but that night, I dreamed of the figure again. This time, I wasn't wearing the device. It was in my room, standing in the corner, watching. I haven't slept since. I tried throwing the headset away, but every time I do, it reappears on my desk the next morning, the runes more vivid than ever. And now, the whispers aren't just in my dreams. They're in my waking life, too. I don't know what I've connected to, but it's not a glitch. It's not a program. It's something else. Something alive, and it won't let me go.
Story number 5.
The job posting was strange, but I needed the money. It read, "Seeking a night watchman for a private collection. High pay, no experience necessary. Must be able to stay alert through the night." The listing included a number to call, and within minutes of leaving a message, I received a reply. The voice on the other end was deep and businesslike. "You'll be watching over an estate. Your primary task is to ensure the items in the collection remain undisturbed. Do you have reliable transportation?" I did. "Good," the man continued. "Your shift starts tonight. Come prepared to stay from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Bring no one. And under no circumstances should you touch anything in the collection." The pay they offered was generous. Too generous for something as simple as staying awake in a building. But I didn't question it. I needed the cash. The estate was an old, sprawling mansion deep in the countryside. Its Gothic architecture loomed against the dark sky, the windows glowing faintly from within. When I arrived, a tall man in a suit greeted me at the door. "You must be Daniel," he said, his voice clipped and formal. He handed me a key and a flashlight. "The collection is in the basement. Your station is there. Do not wander the house." I nodded, though the warning felt unnecessary. The mansion had an oppressive air, the kind that made you want to stay put and not explore. The basement was massive, more like a museum than a cellar. Glass cases lined the walls, each displaying a strange object: a cracked porcelain doll, a tarnished locket, a dagger with an intricately carved handle. There were dozens of items, each more bizarre than the last. At the center of the room was a single chair and a desk. On the desk sat a ledger and a clock. The instructions were simple. 1. Write down anything unusual in the ledger. 2. Do not open the cases. 3. Do not leave until 6 a.m. At first, the job seemed laughably easy. I sat in the chair, scrolling through my phone, occasionally glancing around the room. The place was unnervingly quiet, but nothing unusual happened. Until the clock struck midnight. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound. It was coming from one of the glass cases. I turned my flashlight toward the noise and saw the porcelain doll. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, its lifeless eyes staring directly at me. I froze. Had it moved? I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But then the tapping grew louder, sharper, echoing through the room. I wrote it down in the ledger, my hand shaking. When I looked up again, the doll's head had shifted further, now leaning unnaturally far to the side. I got up from my chair, keeping my distance, and shined the flashlight on the case. The tapping stopped. That's when I noticed something else. The dagger in another case, it wasn't where it had been before. Earlier, it had been lying flat, but now it stood upright, the blade pointing at the glass as if it was trying to cut through. A chill ran down my spine. I backed away and returned to my chair, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. The hours dragged on and the tapping gave way to other sounds. Faint whispers, the creak of floorboards, the metallic clang of something hitting glass. Every time I looked, something in the collection had shifted. The doll now faced the wall, its head turned completely around. The locket's clasp was open, though it had been shut before. A withered handprint had appeared on the inside of one of the cases, smeared against the glass. By 3 a.m., I was on the verge of losing it. I considered leaving, but the thought of breaking the rules, the man's stern warning not to leave, terrified me more than staying. At 4:15 a.m., the lights in the basement flickered and went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Panic set in. I fumbled with the flashlight, but when I turned it on, the beam illuminated something that made my blood run cold. The doll was out of its case. It stood in the middle of the room, its tiny porcelain hand raised as if pointing at me. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a deafening roar. Shadows moved along the walls, taking shapes that shouldn't exist. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. But as I reached the door, I found it locked. A voice, deep and guttural, echoed behind me. "You were told not to leave." I turned, and the room was alive with movement. The items in the collection, every doll, locket, and dagger were out of their cases, floating in the air, their shapes twisting unnaturally. The last thing I remember is the porcelain doll's face inches from mine, its cracked mouth opening wide in a silent scream. I woke up in my car the next morning, parked in front of the mansion. The sun was rising and the place looked abandoned. Windows boarded up. The front door chained shut. I don't know how I got there or what happened to me in those final moments. But when I checked my bank account, the money was there. I've tried to tell myself it was a nightmare, that I imagined the whole thing, but every night since, I've heard tapping on my bedroom window. And this morning I found the porcelain doll on my nightstand.
Story number 6.
It started with a harmless notification. A device near you wants to connect. Accept? I glanced at my phone, confused. I was sitting in my apartment, alone, and there were no Bluetooth devices nearby that I didn't already own. The name of the device was just a string of random characters, X4GZ092. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I hit decline and went back to scrolling through social media. The notification popped up again. A device near you wants to connect. Accept? This time, I ignored it. A few minutes later, the same notification appeared, but now the device name had changed. It read, I see you. I froze. My apartment was small, and I knew for a fact I was alone. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table, trying to shake off the unease. That's when the sound started. It was faint at first, like static coming from somewhere in the room. I glanced around, but nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed my Bluetooth speaker on the shelf. It was on. I hadn't turned it on. Before I could move, a voice crackled through the speaker. It was distorted, low, and unnatural. Why won't you let me in? My stomach dropped. I yanked the speaker's plug from the wall, silencing it, and tried to convince myself it was some kind of prank. But then my phone vibrated again. The notification was back. A device near you wants to connect. Accept? This time, the device name read, It's too late. I turned off my phone completely and tossed it onto the couch, my heart racing. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just a glitch. But then the lights in my apartment flickered and went out. I sat in the sudden darkness, my pulse pounding in my ears. The only light came from the glow of my router, blinking steadily in the corner. And then, it stopped blinking. The room was pitch black. I heard the static again, louder this time, and it wasn't coming from the speaker. It seemed to surround me, filling the space with its grating hum. A faint, mechanical voice emerged from the noise. You should have accepted. I scrambled for my phone, fumbling to turn it back on. The screen lit up, but instead of my usual home screen, there was a single message in large, bold letters. Look behind you. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to stay still, but I couldn't resist. Slowly, I turned my head. The room was dark, but not empty. There was something standing in the corner. A figure, tall and shadowy, its edges flickering like static on an old television. Its face, if you could call it that, was featureless except for two glowing orbs where eyes should have been. It didn't move. I bolted for the door, flinging it open and rushing into the hallway. My neighbor's lights were on, and the normalcy of it felt jarring. I stayed with a friend that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I finally dared to turn my phone back on, it was normal. No strange notifications, no messages. But the next morning when I returned to my apartment, something was waiting for me. A single piece of paper lay on my kitchen table. It read, You let me in.
Story number 7.
It was supposed to be a quick road trip. I was driving through the back roads of Pennsylvania, cutting through dense woods to save time. My GPS had rerouted me after a major accident on the highway, and I figured a bit of country scenery wouldn't hurt. The road was narrow and winding, bordered by towering trees that seemed to close in as the sun dipped below the horizon. The deeper I drove, the less familiar everything became. My GPS started glitching, the little blue dot spinning aimlessly before it disconnected entirely. I told myself it was fine. These roads had to lead somewhere, right? About 30 minutes later, I saw it. A sign half hidden by overgrown vines. Welcome to Black Hollow. I didn't remember seeing it on the map. The name sent a strange chill through me, but I didn't have much choice. The gas gauge was dangerously close to empty. The town appeared suddenly, as if it had been waiting for me. The buildings were old, their wood warped and paint peeling. There wasn't a soul in sight. No lights, no movement, just an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. I pulled into the first gas station I saw. It was ancient, the kind with manual pumps and faded signs advertising brands I'd never heard of. When I stepped out of the car, the air was heavy, the kind that muffled sound. Even the trees seemed unnaturally quiet. The station's door creaked open, and an old man stepped out. He wore a tattered jacket and a hat that shadowed most of his face. His eyes, though, were sharp, almost too sharp, as if they could see right through me. "Lost?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Just need some gas," I replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded and began filling my tank. "Not many people pass through Black Hollow," he said, not looking at me. "Roads have a way of keeping folks out." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. When he finished, he gave me a strange look, his expression a mix of pity and warning. "Drive straight through," he said. "Don't stop for nothing. And if you see a woman in white, keep going." I froze. "A woman in white?" I asked, forcing a nervous laugh. "Is that some kind of local legend?" He didn't answer. I paid, got back in my car, and drove. The road out of town was even darker, the trees seeming to lean closer to the edges of the pavement. The old man's words gnawed at me, but I tried to shake them off. It was probably just a weird way to spook travelers. About 10 minutes later, I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, dressed in a flowing white gown that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Her face was obscured by a veil, her head tilted down. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. She didn't move. "Don't stop," the old man's voice echoed in my mind. I pressed the gas pedal and drove past her. My heart pounded as I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A few miles later, I saw her again, standing in the same position, her figure eerily still. This time, she was closer to the road. Panic set in. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me. I sped up, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. The road twisted sharply, and I nearly lost control as I rounded the bend. When I looked back at the road, she was there, standing in the middle of the lane. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car passed right through her. The temperature inside plummeted, my breath fogging up the windshield. A bone-chilling whisper filled the car, low and unintelligible. And then she was sitting in the passenger seat. Her veil had been lifted, revealing hollow, blackened eyes and a mouth that stretched far too wide. "Turn around," she hissed, her voice like nails scraping against glass. I screamed and swerved, the car skidding off the road and into a ditch. When I woke up, it was daylight. My car was intact, but my phone was dead, and the gas tank was full, despite driving for miles the night before. The road was empty, no sign of the woman or the town, but on the dashboard was a single white veil, stained with something dark. I haven't driven through back roads since.
Story number 8.
It started with a letter. I found it in my mailbox one morning, though it had no return address. The envelope was old, yellowed at the edges, and sealed with a wax stamp. Inside was a single piece of parchment. The handwriting was ornate, like something out of the 1800s. It read, "Dear recipient, you have been selected. The Watcher's invitation extends to you. Come alone to 146 Blackwood Lane tomorrow at midnight. Bring nothing but yourself. Say nothing to anyone." There was no signature. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the letter was meant for me. The address wasn't far, maybe 20 minutes from my apartment. I tried Googling it, but nothing came up. No records, no images, just blank search results. By the next evening, curiosity had won. I told myself I'd go, if only to prove it was nonsense. At 11:50 p.m., I parked in front of 146 Blackwood Lane. The house was enormous and decrepit, its once grand facade now cloaked in ivy and decay. The windows were dark, and the air was unnaturally still, as though the entire street was holding its breath. I almost turned back, but then the front door creaked open. It wasn't a gust of wind. It was deliberate, inviting. I stepped inside. The interior was suffocatingly dark, the faint scent of mildew and something metallic filling the air. A flicker of candlelight caught my eye, drawing me toward a long hallway. At the end of the corridor was a single room lit by dozens of candles. A wooden table sat in the center, and on it was a chair with a single piece of parchment resting on the seat. It read, "Sit." Against my better judgment, I did. The moment I sat down, the candles dimmed, their flames flickering wildly. The room felt colder, and I realized the shadows on the walls weren't following the light. They moved independently, writhing and stretching like living things. A voice spoke from the darkness, low and distorted, as though it were coming from inside my head. "Do you accept the invitation?" My throat was dry. Who are you?" The shadows rippled, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid form. Its eyes were pinpricks of light, its edges shimmering like heat waves. "We are the Watchers," it said. "Accept." and you will be part of something eternal. Reject, and you will never leave this place. The air pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. What happens if I accept? I asked, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, the light of its eyes flaring. You will serve, it said simply. You will watch. I didn't know what that meant, but the alternative was clear. Refuse, and I wouldn't survive the night. I accept, I whispered. The shadows surged forward, enveloping me completely. The cold was unbearable, and my vision swam as a flood of voices filled my mind. Some screamed, others whispered, but all of them said the same thing. Welcome to the Watchers. When I woke up, I was back in my car. The clock read 12:01 a.m., but something was wrong. My hands weren't my hands anymore. They were gaunt, the skin paper thin, veins black like ink. In the rearview mirror, my eyes glowed faintly. On the dashboard was a fresh letter, sealed with the same wax stamp. It was addressed to someone else, a new recipient. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't human anymore. I was a watcher now, and it was my turn to deliver the invitation.